They snapped steel to his wrists under the neon, and the city blinked as if embarrassed to meet his eyes. The black man's hands, calloused, honest, were shown to the crowd like evidence of a guilt he did not own. A laugh cut through the drizzle, sharp as glass. He shaped his face into a quiet mask and swallowed the shame whole. A wet packet gleamed in an officer's palm, a staged token that turned a mourning into accusation and a life into rumor. Neighbors turned away. Cameras learned his humiliation before they learned his name. When the cuffs closed, the heaviest thing was not the metal, but the soft, aching knowing that dignity had been traded for someone else's convenience. Watch until the end to see how this incredible story unfolds, and let us know what time you're watching today. Rain came in thin, steady threads that morning, soft enough to make the street glow, hard enough to wash the city a little cleaner. Marcus Hale stood at his kitchen window and watched those threads map themselves on the black asphalt, on the cracked sidewalk, on the sleeping cars. The neon of the corner store burned a tired blue, and the gas station across the street hummed like a mechanical heart. He cupped the mug between hands that were small and scarred and steady, feeling the heat move through him in a way he did not expect to need. He liked mornings like this because they were precise. The world had not yet started arguing with itself. The smell of coffee, the faint iron of the rain, the distant hiss of tires, everything fit into a small, clear pattern he could hold in his mind. Once, patterns were his trade. Now, they were the thing he reached for when the rest of the day threatened to pull him apart. He dressed with quiet care. His shirt was plain, his shoes lived in, his jacket smelled faintly of old wood and winter. On the table, beneath a folded morning paper, lay a small leather case. He opened it with the ease of muscle memory and touched the object inside as if greeting someone he had not seen in a long time. A pendant shaped like a gavel, dulled at the edges, its chain thin but not broken. He put against his palm and let the memory come, courtroom lights, the drag of robes, the silence that followed a well-asked question. It made his chest ache in a private way. He set the pendant back and told himself he would only think about it for a moment. Outside, the gas station light blinked and a sedan rolled up under the canopy to fill quiet tanks. The sound of a person moving, the snap of a conversation, everything so ordinary it could be overlooked. Marcus watched a young man in a fluorescent jacket pin an ID to his chest, and then, for no obvious reason, his eyes moved to the license plate as if it held a message meant only for him. He felt the old muscle in him tighten, an old reflex like a judge hearing the first gasp of a witness, and he closed his eyes because the reflex did not belong to any part of his life he wanted to keep. He lived in a small apartment above a storefront that would never make it into city guides. The building had one elevator that did not always answer, a stairwell that smelled of lemon and mop water, and a landlord named Joe who knocked too loud and kept too many promises. Marcus liked it there because it gave him the illusion of being able to leave. He did not leave much. He preferred to watch life move below to catalog it. Cataloging made sense to him. It was how he found order in things that otherwise looked messy and dangerous. There was a tenderness to the way he handled his morning, a tenderness that hid a tiredness he refused to call by name. He had been careful with his life, careful with words, careful with friendships, careful even with his laughter, which he used like an old, valuable coin. That care had cost him some things: distance from people who wanted to be closer, nights spent alone explaining himself to shadows. It had also made him a man who listened. People told him things in small pieces because they trusted the way he kept secrets. It made him necessary, sometimes. It made him lonely other times. A sound broke the quiet. His phone buzzing on the counter, a short, insistent voice. He did not want to answer it, yet. He let it buzz twice and then stopped. The message, when he read it, was the kind that could break a morning into two shapes before and after. The words were simple and jarring. They took him in last night. Gas station. You need know. He read the line twice because the name that followed ought not to have been there. It was a neighbor's son. Everyone knew his face at the corner store, a thin, polite boy named Eli with a laugh that did not reach his eyes. Marcus felt something cool slide under his ribs when he read the message. It was not fear. It was a flat, iron sort of recognition that some things were about to be rearranged. He put the phone down and looked again at the rain. The city washed but did not cleanse. It held stains beneath the surface, veins of past actions and choices that only showed if you looked long enough. He remembered standing once at a different window, years before, watching a man handcuffed beneath a streetlight and thinking how the light had turned ordinary things into evidence. He remembered the small, private laws he had made for himself. Be useful, be exact, be gentle with the people who trust you. He also remembered how rarely those rules kept the world from striking. From the other side of that memory came a voice that was not his, not the voice of memory, but the voice of record. It noted facts. A man had been taken at a gas station in public view. Witnesses were present. Rain would blur footage. Officers had jurisdiction and uniforms and radios that swallowed more than they transmitted. That voice did not linger on hurt or intention. It filed things away. It was a useful voice. Marcus let it speak, let it list and sort. He depended on it sometimes like he depended on a pen or a scale. He dressed again, slower now, tucking the pendant beneath his shirt because it was a private talisman and not a thing to display. He glanced once at the framed photograph on his wall, a picture of a younger man in a suit, a woman smiling beside him, a child on her lap. The edges of the frame were worn, and he could not say the last time he had touched it. Some pictures are maps to old life, some are warnings. At the door, he paused and listened to the building breathe, the refrigerator hum, a neighbor's radio playing low and wrong. He stepped out into the hallway, and the rain met him like a cool hand on the face. The city smelled of wet concrete and gasoline and the sour sweetness of someone else's morning. He pulled his collar up and began to walk, each step measured, as if measuring could change the shape of what would happen next. He did not yet know how big the morning would be, only that it felt like the kind of day where a small thing could become a turning point. He walked toward the corner where the gas station's neon painted everything brief and blue, and in his pocket his thumb found the chain of the pendant and turned it not for luck, but as a way to remind himself of who he had been and perhaps who he might yet be. The rain had slowed to a mist by the time Marcus reached the corner. The gas station's canopy threw a pale, blue light over puddles that kept the city's reflections alive. He had not planned to come closer than the sidewalk, but something in the text message had moved him in a way that made his steps small and sharp, as if he were trying not to startle the air. From where he stood, he could see everything. The attendants leaned back behind the counter, the paper cup trembling in a hand, the coil of cigarette smoke that never quite rose. He saw Eli first, the young neighbor sitting on the curb with his knees up, eyes wide and wet. And then he saw the man the message had named, Adrian Brooks. Adrian stood by the pump like someone who belonged to no hurry. He wore a dark coat that fitted him as if it were a thought. His hands were steady on the pump, his shoulders even. Marcus saw his face clearly, calm, with an odd patience, an expression that made him feel both curious and unsettled. 2 police cars slid under the canopy without the sirens. Their lights stuttered in the mist and then stopped. Uniforms stepped out with the kind of practice care that comes from long use. The nearest officer was Mark Reynolds, tall and broad, his jacket heavy with the shapes of things that belonged to a badge. Another officer, Michael Tanner, moved with a thinner, sharper gait, his jaw set like he had learned to make commands without asking questions. Marcus watched because he had no better place to park his attention. He had been a man in court once, a man with memory of rule and order, and even now he measured the scene as if it were a problem to solve. The thought that rose in him was simple and terrible. This is where mistake becomes a headline. The officers did not give a warning. They walked straight to Adrian and said his name like it was a verdict. Adrian looked up slowly. For one breath, Marcus thought he would move away, that he would speak his name and make the moment lighter. Instead, Adrian kept his hands where they were, palms open to rain, and answered in a voice that was low and clear. "What's the charge?" "You match the description," Reynolds said. "Loitering and resisting. Step away from the pump." The words were exact and small, like instruments. Marcus's throat tightened at the casualness of it. He had seen the way words were used before, how they could turn a person from neighbor to suspect with a single step. Adrian complied with the request to step away, but he did it with a dignity that angered Marcus in a way he could not immediately name. The officers moved as if they had rehearsed the choreography, one to the front, one to the side. Before anyone could see clearly, an officer's hand went into Adrian's pocket and produced a small, crumpled packet. The motion was quick and professional. The packet shone wetly in the light. Marcus noticed, with a judge's habit of marking sequence, that the packet had not been visible a heartbeat before the officer's hand dove in. It made a cold sensation cross his skin. "You got a warrant?" Marcus found himself saying before he could stop the voice. It surprised him as much as anyone. The officers looked at him, Reynolds with the steadiness of someone used to being the center of attention, Tanner with a flash of annoyance. "Mind your business," Reynolds said, but there was a tightness to the words. Adrian did not move. He let the officers examine the packet. He let them speak to him like he was an object to be catalogued. When they cuffed him, his fingers did not tremble. He touched his chest as if to check something was there, then lifted his head and caught Marcus's eye. For a moment the rain made a veil between them. But Adrian's look was not only calm, it was knowing. He nodded to Marcus the way you nod to someone who has remembered you. His lips formed a single syllable that landed against the rain. "Marcus." The sound traveled like paper on water. It was as if a name attached itself to the whole scene and made it heavier. The impartial voice in Marcus's head, the one that filed facts and kept them tidy, reported the basics. A man had been arrested at 9:12 a.m. at the corner pump. 2 officers uniformed. 1 witness seated on the curb. Security camera facing the pump. Evidence recovered and bagged. The voice said these things without heat. It was useful in a way that did not touch grief. But the feeling that Marcus took was not data. It was a small ignition that lived under the sternum, an image of a hand opening and closing, a packet that appeared where nothing had been, an officer's glance that was too quick. He had spent his life learning to spot anomalies. This felt like one. As the officers led Adrian to the car, Marcus noticed a small habit in the man, a slight crumpling of a paper he had held in his left hand. For that second, Marcus could see a line of text, a string of letters smudged by rain. Adrian's fingers pressed the paper into his palm and then let it go when the cuffs closed. The paper fluttered to the ground, and Marcus reflexively stepped forward. He bent down, hands in the cold, and picked it up. It was a receipt from the station's little counter, stamped with time and digits, 9:08 a.m. Under the store name, someone had written a single word in blue ink, hurried and all but erased by the mist. "Remember." Below it was a number that looked like an address or a code. Marcus held the receipt and felt the pendant at his heart, a small, heavy thing, against his sternum. The word on the paper made something click beneath his ribs. He slipped the receipt into his pocket without thinking and straightened up as the police car pulled away with its passenger inside. Eli watched from the curb, and in his eyes Marcus saw the outline of a question too large for a child. How do you look a man after you've seen him taken? The impartial recorder would later note witnesses, times, and that a paper had been recovered. It would not be able to make out a motive. Motive is not something that fits neatly into folders. It requires a story, and stories need people willing to say what they saw. Marcus turned away from the glass canopy and felt, with a clarity almost like a physical ache, that the morning had shifted. What was ordinary and what was accusation had been rearranged into something that would not leave him alone. Marcus did not think of himself as someone who held grudges. He thought of himself as careful, as a man who made room for people's faults the way a surgeon makes room for a scar. But watching Adrian handcuffed under the gas station light, something old and heavy rose in him that resembled anger, and older still that resembled regret. He had known Adrian once. In a way he had not expected to know anyone. They had argued about law books and fairness over too strong coffee, had shared a project for a community legal clinic, and had laughed at the same tired joke about judges and their wigs. That closeness had been small and easy then. It lived in the afternoons and in files. Now it sat between them like a silent accusation. When Marcus walked back up the block, Eli fell into step beside him as if naturally drawn. The boy's hoodie was damp and his hair clung to his forehead. Marcus looked at him and felt the soft protective thing rise in his chest that he had tried to tuck away for years. "You okay?" he asked. Eli shrugged. They said he had something on him. Mrs. Klein said she saw it fall. He said the words as if trying them on, like they might not fit. Marcus thought of the receipt folded damp in his pocket, the single blue word that had been scrawled, "Remember." He did not tell Eli about it. Children hold the future like a secret, and adults must sometimes keep it folded away or watch it break. Inside his apartment, Marcus called a number he had not dialed in a long time. The line clicked. A voice answered that had the soft kindness of someone who had once loved him. Sarah's voice came back, cautious and familiar. "Marcus? Is everything?" "I need to talk about Adrian," he said. Saying the name made the room feel smaller. The pendant against his chest felt like a small, hot coin. There was a pause. Sarah's life had moved on. She taught at a local university now, ran a small legal aid project, smiled at photographs of students in Dean's newsletters. She had been part of a life that had once pulled Marcus along and then let him go. He missed the ease of that connection sometimes, the way she could make the world look like a thing that might be understood. "What happened?" she asked finally. He told her what he had seen. He left out the receipt at first because he wanted to hear her voice. She tested facts, asked for names 4 times. Her questions were simple and tidy. When he said the officer's name, she said, "Tanner." "Reynolds," as if fitting pieces on a board. "Yes," Marcus said, but it felt off. "Sarah." There was a moment. He tried to explain the sensation, that small catch in his throat like a syllable snagged on a truth. She listened and then said quietly, "Keep the receipt. Take a picture of it. Don't talk to anyone else yet." Her words were practical, and they landed on him like a hand steadying a table. She had always been that kind of person, the calm ledger in the middle of storms. He realized with a small start that he wanted her beside him in a way he had not allowed himself to want for years. Across town, Officer Mark Reynolds returned to his squad car and found the radio humming the sort of small news that keeps precincts tidy. He knew how to make his life simpler by staying in roles. He had grown up in a family where silence was a way to survive. He kept his thoughts like coins in his pocket. Small, hard, counted. Michael Tanner, by contrast, always seemed to move as if rehearsing for a role he had not yet earned. He noticed things others missed, an odd look the way someone shifted weight, and it made him sharp and sometimes lonely. They talked later in the station in the way men sometimes do after public action. Conversations were thin. Protocol reports the name Adrian Brooks repeated like a headline meant to settle matters. There was a small grin from Tanner when someone joked about a shift that would look good on report. Reynolds did not laugh. He watched Tanner and felt a small shift in his gut. He could not name a prick of discomfort that felt formless and important. That discomfort would, later, be called intuition. For now it only lived as a prickle. Adrian, from the back seat of the cruiser, said nothing that day beyond the single name he gave Marcus. He had ways of holding himself that made people imagine he carried secrets like passports, easily without fuss because he had learned to need them. Once he had worked nights at a community center, teaching kids to write their names cleanly on paper. Once he had hoped he could change the world in small acts. The handcuffs had not surprised him. The look on the officer's face when the packet had been found had. There was a conversation that did not happen that afternoon, one Marcus kept returning to in his mind. He imagined himself standing between the officers and Adrian and asking the simple question, why, and being listened to. In his imagined version, he saw a different outcome, one where a conversation cut through the rote motions of arrest and produced something like truth. He told himself stories like this as if rehearsal might make them real. In his quieter moments, he recognized the shape of his hope. It was not only for Adrian, but for the time when he once moved through a courtroom and believed words could right things. He thought of his past work and the reason he had left. There had been a case years ago that haunted him. A man had been convicted on weak testimony, and Marcus, in his role, had argued a point he now wished he had argued harder. That memory was a small stone in his shoe that had made him limp away from a career that asked too much of his conscience. It also explained the particular tenderness he felt for those taken in ways that smelled like injustice. He had made a promise then to himself: be exact, keep the record clean, guard what could be guarded. It had not been enough. Through the next few days, the neighborhood divided itself into small camps: those who looked the other way, those who whispered about policing, those who made calls to news channels. Eli's mother came by Marcus's door with coffee and a face that wore worry like a mask. Joe, the landlord, pretended not to notice, but left a bag of groceries that smelled faintly of stale bread and mercy. Sarah sent texts with times and questions and a message that said simply, "I can come by." Each gesture mapped a constellation of support and distance. Marcus placed each star into his hands and watched how they warmed or chilled his skin. Beneath the ordinary interactions lay something else, a tightening thread between people who had known each other in different ways. Marcus felt it like a pressure behind the ears, a story pressing to be told that would require someone to be brave or foolish enough to say what they knew. He did not yet know who might betray whom, only that trust had small holes and that the smallest wind could make all of it unravel. The thought of betrayal sat beside him like an unwelcome guest, patient and watchful. Marcus slept badly that night, the kind of sleep that is not sleep, but a string of short decisions made in the dark. He woke with the taste of rain in his mouth, and the pendant under his shirt felt heavier than it had before. The receipt in his pocket was damp but legible enough, the word "remember" smudged, the time stamped. He had taken Sarah's advice and kept a photo on his phone, but keeping a picture is not the same as keeping the thing itself. Holding the paper had felt like holding a small promise. He went to the station because he could not stop thinking about the motion he had seen, an officer's hand moving with speed into Adrian's pocket. He had asked for footage from the gas station clerk, politely, like someone requesting a favor. The clerk had been nervous and helpful. He handed Marcus the footage on a cheap flash drive and watched Marcus leave with an expression that could have been pity or fear. At home, Marcus sat alone and watched the recording in his small kitchen. The screen showed the pump, the canopy, and puddles catching the blue light. The footage was grainy, but the motion was the truth. He replayed the moment where Officer Reynolds reached into Adrian's pocket. He slowed the frame until the little actions became loud. Reynolds' hand, the packet, the look on Adrian's face. It was the motion he had noticed in daylight, but now the camera showed an earlier frame he had not seen. A figure in the corner of the shot, moving quickly across the sidewalk toward the canopy before anyone else arrived. Marcus rewound. He watched the figure approach the small shop across the street, pause at the door, and then, with the ease of someone who had done this before, slip something under the edge of the awning. The person turned back, walked away, and then the officers arrived. Marcus felt his mouth go dry. He froze the image, and then, because his mind no longer trusted what his eyes saw, he enhanced the clip, brightening the shadows until he could make out a hood, a familiar gait. He froze again, and the shape of the shoulders struck him like a struck chord. Sarah. It should have been impossible. Sarah had been the calm ledger in his life, the woman who told him to keep the receipt and take pictures. She had been the voice of steadiness when he had stood before him on the phone. Yet the camera showed her, small and quick, tucking something into place, as if hiding a secret that needed to be found later. Marcus held the phone so tightly the edges dug into his palm. He called her, his voice thin as he asked where she had been that morning. There was a pause on the line, the small static that precedes an explanation. Marcus, I was out," she said finally. "I had to meet someone about a student. It had nothing to do with Adrian." Her words came fast, practiced. "Sarah, the footage," he began, but she cut him off. "You saw it? Marcus, you shouldn't have gotten that." Her breath hitched in a way that sounded like regret. "I thought I had kept it small. I didn't know they'd." "Who, Sarah? Who did you meet?" Marcus asked, and the voice he used was the one he used in court when he wanted answers that would not be given easily. She did not answer at once. The silence stretched thin and brittle. When she finally spoke, she chose her words like someone choosing a scalpel. "I met Tanner," she said. "He said there was a kid, one of my students, mixed up with something. They wanted to prevent a worse situation. Marcus, I thought giving them a lead would keep people safe." The line between thought and consequence had been short. Marcus felt it as a physical thing, a split between who he had loved and the rules he kept. "You handed them something," he said. "An address. A name," she said. "I didn't know he would plant anything. I trusted them would act with procedure." Marcus thought of the receipt, with "remember" written on it, the words scrawled in a hurry. He thought of Adrian's calm when the cuff closed. He remembered the quiet of his own chest when Adrian had mouthed his name. The film on his phone did not argue with feelings. It only showed what had been done. When he demanded to know why Sarah hadn't come to him, she said she had been afraid. Afraid for her students, afraid for her job, afraid that if she questioned officers, she would be seen as naive. "I wanted a quick solution," she admitted. The words were small and honest and dangerous. Marcus did not know if she had expected him to understand. He did not yet. Betrayal, he had learned, is not always a dramatic unveiling. Sometimes it arrives as a tidy list of reasons that do not add up to the hurt it leaves. He could not deny that Sarah had believed she was acting from care. But belief and action are separate things. She had stepped across a line he had thought only a judge would cross. She had placed trust in a system he had abandoned because it asked too much of his conscience. That night, when he hung up, Marcus walked to the window and looked down at the street. The city lights had the same neat geometry, but the map in his mind had altered. People he thought he knew had unknown rooms. He was left holding evidence and a new, harder knowledge. The betrayal was not only in the planting of a packet, but in the quiet hand that had helped lay it out. The impartial voice cataloged facts with a clean edge. Sarah met Tanner. An item was hidden. Officers moved to find it. Adrian was arrested. It filed them away. The other voice, the one that felt, kept circling the empty space where trust used to sit. Marcus understood, with a strange tenderness and a sharper pain, that moving forward would mean naming more than what the camera showed. It would mean asking why a woman he had once loved would choose secrecy over confession, and why officers he had once believed might have done their duty had chosen a path that left a man handcuffed and a neighborhood split. He held the receipt again, and this time let the word "remember" land on him like a command he could not ignore. The first twist had not made the world simpler. It had made it smaller and more dangerous, closer in, and in narrowing the space, it had also opened a door. If Sarah had met Tanner, then perhaps there was a reason larger than a single fearful act. Perhaps the packet, the arrest, the hidden paper were threads leading to something wider, something that would require Marcus to reach deeper than he had planned. Marcus felt the city tighten around him like a fist. The discovery of Sarah in the footage had split something cleanly into before and after. Now the edges were raw and sensitive. He moved through days with the weight of choices pressing at his ribs. He could expose what he had found and risk breaking a woman he still cared for, or he could stay silent and watch a man remain jailed on evidence that now smelled of manipulation. Neither option promised comfort. Both promised consequences. The first external blow came softly, like a mail slot delivering bad news. Marcus went back to the clerk to ask more about the store cameras and found, without ceremony, that the footage he had been given no longer matched the station's official copy. The clerk's face tightened. He said there had been a system update, an overwrite that morning, and the manager had made a routine backup. The backup, the clerk said, was corrupted. Marcus felt something cold at the base of his skull. The flash drive he had carried home was a small artifact against a much bigger machine. The impartial inner voice noted facts without heat. Official copies should be kept for 30 days. Cameras log who accesses them. Chain of custody exists to prevent exactly this. That voice, useful and dry, could not comfort him. Marcus found himself leaning on old instincts. He called an old contact at the legal aid clinic who owed him a favor and who, because of past loyalty, agreed to ask for the station's logs. The contact's reply was careful and slow. The logs showed a gap, a 90-second window that the system recorded as maintenance. The 90 seconds might not mean anything to a person who did not look for patterns. To Marcus, it felt like an empty space someone had cut and folded away. Word reached him next through a different channel. A short email with no header, no signature, just a line that read, "Stop poking where you don't belong." Marcus read it 3 times and then folded the phone into his hand until the edges whitened. Threats, he thought, were a cheap costume for people who wanted to make others small. But they work. They bruise confidence. They ask the same question in every language, "Will you step back?" Inside him, the dilemma multiplied. He remembered the man from years ago whose conviction had haunted him, how a single choice to stay silent had echoed in every courtroom thereafter. That memory was a live thing and a teacher. It spoke with the voice he trusted least, the voice that could say with certainty, "Do nothing and protect yourself and watch injustice persist." He did not want to be that man again. Sarah's messages came in uneven bursts. Sometimes she wrote with the easy familiarity of a woman trying to bridge an unexpected fracture, short notes about coffee, papers she had graded, a line asking after Eli. Other times she was gone, unreadable. When Marcus called her, she answered and the conversation dissolved into the careful territory of half-truths and pleas. She said she had warned Tanner that she might be questioned. She said she had not known the officers would plant anything. She said she had been scared. "Why didn't you tell me?" Marcus asked once, and his voice surprised him with its strictness. The voice that had once argued in court wanted answers, not excuses. "I thought I was protecting people," she said. "You have to believe I wasn't trying to hurt Adrian." Belief did not erase action. Marcus thought of Adrian behind the wheel in the cruiser, the calm strength in his face as the cuffs bit his wrists. He kept thinking of the word on the receipt. Remember, like a command or a plea. Remember what? Remember who? The question landed heavy. His past promised that silence begets complicity, but speech can also break what is fragile and dear. External pressure came from unexpected directions. A local reporter called, her voice bright and hungry for a story. "We heard about an arrest," she said. "Any comment on police procedure?" Marcus felt the old reflex to retreat, to let professionals handle public statements. But letting professionals handle things meant letting the official version stand. He gave her nothing and hung up thinking of the 90 seconds missing from the tape and the anonymous threat that smelled of leverage. At the precinct, Marcus felt watched. Officers moved with the practiced choreography of a place that knows it is being looked at. Tanner's eyes met him once across a doorway, a glance that registered annoyance and something else, perhaps calculation. Reynolds avoided him entirely. Marcus could not tell which of those reactions was more dangerous. Both were a kind of measurement. How loud could he be allowed to be before the system made him small? Eli watched him too, with the half-understanding of a child who senses when adults are balancing on thin ropes. Marcus found the boy sitting on the stoop, fiddling with the cuffs of his hoodie. "Are you going to help him?" Eli asked. The question was simple and absolute. Marcus felt a fierce, protective thing rise up that was older than politics, older than law. It was the part of him that had once promised to do right by those who could not stand without support. That night, the choice narrowed into a single fork: confront Sarah publicly and force answers, exposing both her action and the system's abuse, or work quietly to rebuild the chain of evidence to prove tampering beyond a shadow of a doubt. One path would break private ties, the other might not succeed and could leave Adrian behind. Marcus paced the apartment until his feet found the rhythm of decision. He thought of the pendant warm against his sternum and of the photograph of a younger life. He thought of the voice that had catalogued facts and the voice that felt things with the blunt honesty of a human heart. The two voices argued like trained colleagues, one precise, one messy. Neither offered absolution. He laid out what he had. The footage on his flash drive, the receipt, with remember Sarah's confession that she had met Tanner, the corrupted backup, and the anonymous threat. He could go to the media with the facts and risk exposing Sarah. He could go quietly to a judge and request a formal inquiry, but he did not trust that the same institutions that allowed the planting of evidence would now police themselves. When he thought of Adrian, of the dignity with which the man had accepted the cuffs, Marcus felt the moral question as a physical weight. It did not fit neatly into folders. It demanded action that might require personal cost. He understood then that this was a turning moment unlike any he had faced, to keep to his own safety and conscience, or to risk both for a man whose only crime might have been the wrong shoes at the wrong pump. He set his jaw and made his choice, not one of loud pronouncements, not yet, but a plan of quiet, careful steps that would require allies' courage and the willingness to stand in sunlight while people watched. The city outside breathed, unaware of the small wars beginning. Inside, Marcus felt the world narrow and focused until the next move was all that existed. The courtroom smelled of waxed wood and old paper, a dry, patient smell that held its breath as people filed in. Marcus sat near the back, the receipt in his jacket like a small, secret fuse. His hands felt strangely loud, thumbs finding the worn edge of the pendant beneath his shirt, as if the metal could steady his breath. Around him, whispers folded into a tense hush, cameras perched like curious birds. The officers sat at the defense table, shoulders squared, badges bright and dull at once. Sarah sat closer to the front, her fingers clenched a single wayward pen, eyes rimmed with red. The impartial voice in Marcus's head read the room with clinical calm. Judge assigned, prosecutor present, defense counsel at table, public seats filled, clerk ready. The docket listed the matter: petition for emergency review of arrest and request for evidentiary hearing. Attached to the petition were the items Marcus had gathered: the flash drive, the receipt marked, remember, screen captures, and a sworn statement from Eli. The record, for the first time since the gas station, was moving toward clarity. When the man entered and took the bench, the room paused as if breath itself had swerved. Adrian Brooks did not walk like someone who had been in handcuffs 2 days before. He moved like a man who had learned how to hold a room with silence. His robe hung simple and certain. He looked into the gallery, and his gaze found Marcus with the same steady, almost private calm as at the pump. For a second, the world narrowed to two faces and a withheld question. Adrian's voice, when he spoke, held no triumph. "This hearing will be conducted with plain truth," he said. The words landed like a verdict. There was a small ripple of surprise at the bench assignment. How could a man taken under arrest be the one to preside? The procedural voice asked a slow question, recusal, and then, with quiet force, Adrian dismissed it. "I will not recuse myself," he said. "I will hear this matter because the truth in it cannot wait." It was as if the irony of the moment sharpened everything else. He wore it like a shield. Marcus felt a strange heat in his chest, anger, relief, and fear braided together. It was an odd, bright thing to see Adrian in that place, not as a defendant, but as an arbiter. If the world had been a straight line before, now it had folded into a new shape, where coincidence felt deliberate. The empathetic voice in him reached for reason and for mercy at once. He knew how small gestures could break a life, and how bold ones could mend them. The prosecution, represented not by a grand office, but by a determined public defender who owed Marcus a favor, played Marcus's footage first. The screen filled with the grainy canopy, puddles catching light. The grain smoothed and revealed the small, shadowy figure tucking something under the awning and stepping back. The camera cut to Officer Reynolds reaching into Adrian's pocket and producing the packet. The room exhaled as if the truth had been waiting only to be seen properly. Defense counsel stood fast, voice low and clinical, calling the footage inconclusive, the flash drive tampered with, the chain of custody broken. The officers' faces did not change. Mark Reynolds' jaw tightened. Michael Tanner's fingers drummed a careful beat. They objected to every leap the petitioner made. The impartial parts of the courtroom argued themselves into procedure. Objections rose. Sustained. Overruled. Technicalities moved like gears. What changed? Everything was not procedure, but a small human thing. Eli, the boy from the curb, walked steadily to the stand with Marcus by his side. He carried a phone. Its cracked screen held a shaky video he had taken while playing. At first it looked like a child's clip, useless and small. Then the sound was magnified, the frame steadied, and there at the very edge of the footage lay the 90 seconds, a dark shape, moving with determination, stopping, slipping something into place, and walking away. The person's face, when the frame brightened, was not Kennedy by shadow. It was clear enough, the narrow jaw, the set of the shoulders, Michael Tanner. A hush folded over the courtroom like a curtain. The impartial voice marked the new fact. An independent recorded third-party clip now filled the system gap. Chain of custody questions could be re-examined. The planted evidence now had a witness beyond uniforms. Tanner's defense faltered, then crumpled. Reynolds rose, flushed and cornered, his objections sharp but losing air. Sarah went next, and this time she did not try to shield herself in careful answers. She told the court what she had told Marcus in whispers. She had met Tanner because she feared for a student. She had given a name and an address to him, believing it was a short path to safety. She had not intended that the officers would manufacture evidence. She said the words slowly, as if measuring each for the weight they would carry. I expected a procedure, she said, voice breaking. I did not expect a packet to be planted. Her confession was small, human, and brutal in its effect. Adrian watched her without expression, but when he spoke the small courtesy he once showed Marcus, the nod that acknowledged shared past, was there. He ordered the clerk to subpoena the station's internal logs and then, with decisive calm, to play an unedited backup a neighbor had turned over that morning. Joe, the landlord, who had come forward with a grainy but continuous feed from a shop camera. The backup revealed, in clearer light and from a different angle, the whole planting in a frame that left no shadow for doubt. The officers' posture changed. They tried to speak, to call out reason and procedure, but their words were swallowed by facts. The judge, Adrian, was not theatrical. He read the law slowly, and then, with the kind of mercy that comes from knowing pain, he ordered immediate administrative suspension pending a full investigation. The gavel fell like a soft, decisive rain. Cameras flashed, murmurs rose, and then steadied into a stunned silence. Marcus felt like a man who had been underwater and had finally broken the surface. Relief came with a bitter edge. Sarah's betrayal had been costly, but truth had cut a path. The impartial files would now list evidence, timestamps, and admissions. The human ledger, the one Marcus could not file away, recorded the pain of a woman who had chosen fear and a man who had chosen to speak. As people rose and the courtroom emptied into the late afternoon light, Adrian stepped down from the bench and met Marcus in the aisle. Their hands met for a single, steady second, a silent recognition of things lost and things restored. Outside, rain had begun again, soft and patient, washing the courthouse steps in bright, clean motion. The city unfurled around them, changed but still breathing, as if it had taken on the small knowledge that one night could not hold the shape of a life. The days after the hearing moved with the odd hush of things that have been unsettled and are trying in small ways to find a new order. The precinct posted the suspension notices in a line on the bulletin board, 2 names, a case number, a short sentence about pending investigation. Marcus read them 3 times, each time as if reading a map that might tell him where to step next. He felt a quiet satisfaction that facts had teeth now, that procedure had not simply folded back into protocol and left nothing changed. The impartial voice cataloged this plainly: administrative leave, internal affairs review, potential criminal charges. The list of consequences fit like clean paper in a folder. It did not, and could not, carry the shape of how people felt. Sarah came to his door with a bag of groceries and her hair tied back in the old, practical way he remembered. She looked smaller than she had in court, less guarded, more exposed. The confession had cost her a reputation she had quietly built. It had also broken a kind of private covenant between them. Marcus let her in because closing the door felt more like hiding than healing. They sat at his small table, the pendant resting warm beneath his shirt, the photograph of the old life angled like a question. I am sorry, she said without flourishing. The words were simple, but heavy. Not for what happened, only for not coming to you. I thought I could fix it without breaking anything. I thought I was protecting people. Marcus listened. The empathetic voice in him wanted to reach out to close the distance that had grown between them. The impartial voice cataloged the harm. A man arrested, trust broken, procedure corrupted. It noted also that Sarah had told the truth in court and that her testimony had been essential. Truth, it seems, is a hard thing to hold, both destructive and necessary. You put faith in the wrong thing, Marcus said, not with anger but with the tired clarity of someone who had learned to name what must be named. You wanted safety quickly, and you traded one set of dangers for another. She nodded, tears running quietly down the lines at her mouth. There was no expectation of absolution. They had reached a place where words could only be honest or they would be nothing at all. Marcus found that he could forgive the person because people make wrong choices from fear, but he could not undo the action. Forgiveness would not pretend the act had no weight. It would instead insist on consequence and on repair. Outside, Adrian had been given a temporary leave from his bench to avoid conflicts while investigations ran their course, but his voice had set a motion that could not be easily reversed: an independent review of arrest procedures in the district, a public audit of certain precinct logs, and a small committee formed to re-examine similar cases. He had used the shape of the court to pry open an institution that preferred to shut. The impartial record would note motions filed and committees convened. Citizens would later read headlines and judge. The empathetic ledger read the scene differently. A man who had been handcuffed had turned the courtroom itself into a tool for truth. It was a rare thing, iron tempered into use for good. Eli came by with a shy smile and a stack of drawings. His mother watched from the doorway, with relief that smelled like laundry soap. Marcus sat with the boy on the stoop and let the sun find a small place on his knuckles. The neighborhood breathed easier in ways that did not immediately show on official forms. People spoke in small courtesies, an extra loaf left at a doorstep, a more cautious nod to patrol cars passing by. Change begins in such small trades. It accrues like pennies into a life. Marcus grappled, privately, with an old grief that had haunted his decisions. The case he had not fought hard enough, the sentence that had run long after it was given. That memory had driven him away from an old profession and into a quieter life. He now saw that silence had been a kind of surrender. The choice before him had been no longer simply to choose safety or action. It was to reframe what being useful meant. He could retreat behind careful quiet, or he could lean back into the messy work of making the system less able to hide its faults. He began, slowly, to answer that question. He reached out to a small community legal clinic and offered to consult pro bono to help document cases where procedure might have been misstated, to train volunteers in how to keep records that demand attention. The work was neither grand nor headline-ready, but it fit his sense of usefulness, exact, patient, and steady. Marcus felt the old muscle, a judge's appetite for careful ordering, wake in him, shaped now by a softer will. He would not return to a robe, that life had closed, but he would return to the work that had always called to him, to balance a ledger where injustice had been written. There was a moment late one evening when he sat alone and pulled the receipt from his pocket. The single word, "remember," had followed him like an echo. He did not file it away in hope that it would stop whispering. Instead, he placed it in a small box with a flash drive, labeling the box with a date and a short note. Remember had shifted from command to covenant. Remember what happened, yes, but also remember why action mattered. He pinned that reminder where he could find it not as a wound, but as a map. The moral terrain of the story had not been simplified into doctrine. Marcus knew now that people, good, caring, frightened people, can make choices that hurt others. He knew that systems can be weaponized by those who would prefer order over justice. He also saw, with clearer light, that truth sometimes needed someone willing to be both witness and instrument. Justice, he thought, is less a destination than a practice. It asks patience, courage, and the humility to see oneself as part of a larger, messy responsibility. When he walked past the gas station weeks later, the neon hummed its ordinary blue. The pump still had a faint scar where the packet had once been found. Marcus stopped and watched a young man top off his tank and chat with the attendant. No grand scene unfolded. Life, quietly and stubbornly, kept moving. Marcus touched the pendant at his chest and felt its cool weight. He had been asked in a small and terrible way to choose between hiding and acting. He had chosen action, imperfect, costly, human, and in doing so had nudged the world a few degrees toward clearer light. The rain came then, slow and steady, as it had at the start of the story, and Marcus let it fall. It washed the street and steps and the small station sign alike. He did not expect neat endings. He expected, instead, the work of remembering and of repair, daily demanding and true. If you found this story powerful, make sure to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Your support helps us bring more important stories to light.